Thanks, Sam. Hopefully you can all hear me. Good morning. It's been a while since we've had a good discussion about all the different layers that StreamNet has published and does publish from a spatial data standpoint. And so it felt like a good time to provide a chance to start by looking back a little bit, providing context. I know there's a mixture of folks. I'm looking at the attendee list, and actually most of us have been with the project for a number of years. So, but it'll be helpful just to kind of set the stage, remind us of why some of those attributes that are in the spatial data are still there and where they came from. So I want to walk through and just describe, look back, describe the core spatial data sets that we currently compile and publish, and walk through each of them and talk about when and how they're updated, and then discuss some ideas about how those might evolve to meet future needs, which sets the stage for discussion on some other topics on the agenda later in the day. Don't want to get too deep into them, but just want to make that connection since there is a spatial data component to those topics. Next. So just a reminder, like the name StreamNet came from the stream network concept and the way that data were managed in a linear referencing system as measures along routed stream networks. And so, that's the way the data had been compiled when I first came on board and for years. And things evolved, right? The need to maintain a routed hydrography that spans the whole region became quite a challenge, especially as each partner state and entity went in slightly different paths, and then NHD and on and on. Not to go into too much, but just wanted to remember that that's where we started. Next slide. And that these core data sets that we'll talk about later, generalized fish distribution, the fish monitoring locations or trends, as we call them, and dams and hatcheries. Those are data sets that actually have origins in the tabular database in the StreamNet. And so to like reduce confusion, though they have and had in the past tabular entries in the StreamNet tabular database, they are now completely updated as a spatial data exchange. And to go further, dams and hatcheries are now incorporated into West Coast fish facilities layer. But it's important to remember that some of those attributes that are carried in those layers do still retain optional values, optional fields. Next slide. So just as to put a pin on it, these location ID, begin foot, end foot measures, things that are useful from a descriptive standpoint are optional, and they're not being submitted to the tabular database directly in a way that is used for mapping. So I just want to make that point clear, because I think it sometimes causes confusion. And before going further, I just want to pause and encourage folks to just chime in, and if you have comments or questions along the way, I welcome that. Seeing none, next slide. And so in particular, we used to have this table called Look Master. We still have it, but I just want to again highlight that it's not being updated. It's got useful descriptors as place names, and it is for the most part accurate for the trend locations, but in the DES it's an optionally available thing. The point was to try to let those partners that do still use that system in their internal space continue to benefit from it, and knowing though that you can't require everyone to do it since they're not all using the same hydrography. Next slide. So also just, part of the context was recalling we had this classic query system that we really actually had good value, and it was rather elegant. But behind the scenes, what was happening was it was leveraging the linear referencing system to filter and present data, and it was elegant, but it required a fair bit of maintenance to support that approach. So we've, as part of redesigning and moving away from that system, Greg has revamped our query systems to go with it. I just wanted to highlight here the fact that some of the things that we just talked about as being optional are very useful, and they're still revealed in the query system. And so for especially trend records or fish monitoring data locations, if we want these descriptive values like river miles and stream names, et cetera, to show up and be helpful from a descriptive sense, then they do indeed need to be populated in the trends table. Before I go further, again, I want to just, any points of clarification or questions you guys have? No, okay, thanks. Next slide. So as part of that shift, at the same time, we moved away from actually, for a period of years, compiling and as a focus the monitoring trend level records, and focus more on population level data with the CAP project, et cetera. But again, still the linkages are maintained, with the trend ID being manually associated with pop IDs in order to create that linkage back and forth. And in order for this sort of relationship to happen in the query systems, the trend ID is the key. So a feature is in the GIS is mapped based on that trend ID. Next. Okay, so thanks for bearing with me. I thought for the record, it might be useful for anyone who's newer to the project to kind of understand that, especially since how things are submitted is in some cases a mix of things. But I want to just walk through now each of the core data layers that we do continue to update, and how that, when and how those updates occur. So I'm hoping that we can have some discussion on each of these. I'm going to ask some questions. I want to get you guys to give positive or negative feedback on how things are working. So first of all, generalized fish distribution, we haven't had a lot of updates in recent years, but I am hearing and seeing a need this year for sure. A lot of the changes that have happened in dam removals, et cetera, have opened up new habitat, and I can see that there's been also updates and range-wide assessments that have triggered new data. So our reminder, we've sort of, like, in order just to plan the workflow, my position at the commission is on the overhead side. I'm not a StreamNet funded GS position anymore, so I need to really kind of schedule these and also work them into when I can hopefully onboard project staff to help out. So January and February right now is a good time for folks to be submitting or making us aware of new data to incorporate for fish distribution, and that can happen both ways. I'm open to and appreciate when folks are able to actually standardize their data and submit it to fit the template of our published data sets. But I'm also mindful that, especially some of the, like Washington and Oregon, I know both publish their own data standard, and it's pretty straightforward to crosswalk. If it's published and available online, and I know there's a significant update that's ready to be incorporated this time of year, is when I would go and pull it from that source and incorporate it as part of an update. And that's what I'm doing right now. So I wanted just to put that out there, and hopefully get some discussion on this, of whether or not there's feedback on that approach. I know recently Katie from Idaho Fishing Game, I don't know if Katie's online right now, but submitted bottom cutthroat trout and Yellowstone cutthroat trout. So I've got that in the hopper. I see significant updates from Oregon Fish and Wildlife in their published data set, especially reflecting changes to the Klamath. A lot of new presence or current habitat use types being reported as opposed to historical from the past. And I'm also mindful of a data gap in California. We're trying to bridge California fishing wildlife's data in the Klamath as well. So those are in the hopper right now. And one of the things that's come up recently is the question of, are we still publishing and wanting to publish water body distribution layer? And that's a good question for you all. We're definitely interested, especially for resident fish. But I wanted to kind of feel out, like, not every state publishes that openly, or that I've found. So where it's available, we definitely would like to, and recognizing that there was a period where it wasn't being posted, at least. So I think it'd be good to just touch base on that. But I did receive some water body fish distribution data from Idaho recently, and it'll be straightforward to incorporate that. Yeah, I see Evan's hand. Thanks, Evan.
Hey, Van. Sorry, I was busy asking Katie and Becky a question while you were asking us a question, I think. So first and foremost, I'd like to introduce Katie Walker, the newest member of our team over here. And what was your question for Katie, or clarification?
I think you're on mute.
Am I?
Did you get that? Sorry, I was just asking if Katie was on the line because I couldn't see her name on the list, but I wanted to do the same thing and say, nice to meet you, Katie.
Cool.
Welcome.
We're all in my office.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I wanted to acknowledge the data submission recently that's in the hopper, and the plan to incorporate the water bodies again. Something that kind of has been on a pause in terms of publishing, but I'd like to get that back up, and recognizing that, like, I don't know, this is I guess I'll just call out Washington Fish and Wildlife, if Swifty is including a water bodies data set these days. Trying to see who's on from Washington.
Morning, Van. It's Michelle.
Hi, Michelle.
I don't think Leslie's here today, and I know she's usually works with you. I think she's usually off on Tuesdays, so
Gotcha.
I don't think I'll be very much help for you.
Okay, well, I'll follow up with her. But
perfect.
But I just wanted to acknowledge, since Katie and Evan brought it up recently, that we do want to incorporate lake data as well and publish it in the next go around.
Yeah, along those lines, Van.
Yeah, go for it.
So I think I've mentioned before how we've been collaborating with the USGS, as well as a bunch of other federal, state, tribal NGOs, to develop online mappers for range-wide assessments. Specifically, and it was funny, we were just now getting into the demographics. We had our first meeting yesterday for the subcommittee on demographic data, and that was one of their questions. And I thought it was sort of funny because it was like, they were like, do we want to incorporate the lakes? And, and you're sitting there talking about West Slope cutthroat, Yellowstone cutthroat, and I'm like, we should probably incorporate the lakes. Yes. It's like, and so that's why the three of us talking about the water bodies and the GFD, it was super pertinent at the time, but it was funny that the timing. Additionally, they were asking if they could use the old StreamNet 100K enhanced measured stream routes layer, because it's so much more efficient and faster than And I was like, nah, sorry, can't do it. Got to move on. So yeah, just a couple quick updates and anecdotes.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Evan. Yeah, there were definitely some nice things about that system. But yes, got to move on. So I will just on the topic of water bodies, did want to highlight that for reservoir reaches in main stem rivers, we do still prefer a center-lined stream through the middle of the reservoir rather than breaking it up and leaving a gap. I think everyone's doing that based on fish distribution. I've seen it, but just wanted to make sure that reservoir reaches and rivers are still center-lined and included as part of the line network or the line feature class that gets published. So I'm hoping for more discussion on this, but I just wanted to, ask, are there any concerns or suggestions about how to improve the approach as I've described it here? I mean, it's pretty ad hoc, and it has been largely based on the lack of data being submitted over the years. But like I said, this is a time when I see a lot of updates pending from the States. So I see Jake's hand. Let's Jake.
Yeah, sorry, Van. I should have got this in as well beforehand. I can't remember if David Quillen, he's our new GIS coordinator. I think you've already kind of met online and whatnot. But on these types of questions, can we be sure to get these in the notes, Sam, so that they're really highlighted so we can kind of maybe run some of them by John, who's got the more, historical knowledge on what we've done in the past and what we're planning to do moving forward. I think from what I remember so far, we're all on the same page of what you got going on here, Van, but I just want to double check just to make sure and to be able to answer your resident question and polygons and reservoirs and stuff. So
Yeah,
I don't want to make a firm yes or no until we've discussed it amongst ourselves, and maybe we can watch this part of the video with John just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, that sounds good. That's part of, I think, why Dawn also couldn't make it today. So it's part of why we're recording this section of the call. But I appreciate that, and we'll make a point of getting the notes to capture these questions. Yeah, I did talk with John, and thanks for mentioning, David, welcome aboard, about this idea of either data being submitted or myself going out and harvesting it, pulling it down as a snapshot. I've been kind of watching what's available, and I've just noticed recently, I think late last year or fall last year, a number of updates being made to especially the Klamath distributions. So want to get that. It relates to some of the other topics down the road here about current fish range and those other layers. It's cascading gaps in the data right now if we don't incorporate that soon. So that's a priority.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Van, we speaking for Idaho and a little bit, for our collaborators, most of our updates have been pretty piecemeal, pretty fine scale, but we are getting back into the range-wide assessment game. So I fully anticipate more significant large-scale updates to the generalized fish distribution, which we derived from the range-wide assessment. So as we get, back onto a more regular schedule for the range-wide assessments, I fully anticipate a more sustained, more frequent update to the generalized fish distribution.
That's great. And I will say it's kind of alluded to here, but the form of submissions, ideally, it's either all species combined for an agency, or at least all records for a given species, right? So like bottom-level cutthroat trout, all records as opposed to like one or two additions or edits, right? That's hard to kind of manage on my end, and keep straight. So just something to keep in mind, and that's what we've been doing. Just wanted to put it out there. All right, moving on, I suppose. Next slide, please. So fish monitoring locations. Similar thing. Like this is data that actually, for the most part, once established, right, the location of fish monitoring trend locations don't hopefully need to be updated much. They should actually not change once they're created. And I'm not sure how much, this is a good question, how much we expect to see new locations being defined. But just to point out that the API for StreamNet does support the idea of tabular submissions for trend records, and those are purely for the header descriptions and you know, some of the key attributes for the trend table. The actual feature definition in the GIS needs to be submitted separately, and that's a conscious effort that needs to involve notifying PSMFC that, and I believe Mike keeps track of this, right? When anything new gets reported as a new trend ID, it can be, the nice thing about this approach is data can appear in the query system right away, as long as the trend is defined in the API. What will happen in the little example here in the lower left is you'll get a report out of the description and get access to the time and series data, but the map to the right won't display a feature if you haven't sent a GIS feature to be incorporated and published in the trend feature class. And that reminding that includes points, lines, multi-lines, and polygons. So that's part of, you know, the complexity of, right, in the table it's all just a record, but in the GIS it's 4 different layers. So maybe I'll just pose to the group. There's any of you expecting to be sending new trends? They can be on as needed basis, but it's nice to know if there's a pulse of data coming our way.
Yeah, ODF and W will have a pulse of new trends probably in the next few months, but I'm going to be working with David on how should I put it, a better method for me to do so. I want to get a little kind of a project set up to make it a little more seamless. But anyway, yeah,
Okay.
I'll give you a heads up ahead of time when I'm getting close, so you're not surprised by it.
Great, that sounds good. Anybody else expecting to submit new trends? And I can reach out to you and David on this separately, but an approach that would work is to grab a copy as a template of the trend feature class to add new records to, or use as a blank template to be able to fit the standard. That just makes it easier on my end. Okay, next slide. West Coast fish facilities. So this is one that I was hoping we'd have made more progress on and gotten back to you on this. My colleague here at the commission, Lily Cohn, who many of you met, just returned from maternity leave yesterday, actually. So we've been down staff on this, and this is one of the things that I had her working on. So I'm hoping to pick this up again and make more progress, but I just wanted to, you know, describe that this does incorporate hatcheries and dams that I mentioned earlier that originated from the StreamNet tabular database. As you guys know, hatch ID and dam ID are carried as attributes in the fish facilities layer along with facility ID. So that provides a linkage from the trend table for those who are tracking trends at hatcheries and dams. I'm still open to feedback on edits and additions, like we discussed the last tech team meeting, adding a new subtype to acclimation release facilities that Idaho suggested. And I also am working on a data review sort of application to provide more like feature level feedback. But as with fish distribution, you know, partners, if you have something you want to submit to be included, especially if it's like a batch, happy to accept that as published, you know, something that's published that fits the template that's available. And I am hoping to make a push on this guy. I'm kind of, you'll see I'm staggering, right? January and February and March, looking to make a push on this one. So I do have in the hopper data from Oregon Fish and Wildlife. Thank you, David. The hatchery facilities submission you sent will fit this pretty readily, and will fill a number of missing features on the Oregon coast primarily, but it also in some cases will just refine either the names or the location a little bit. I think it's worth saying that, you know, for cases where a partner submits a record like that, we will defer to that agency or that state in the case of Oregon. And, you know, there may be times when there's multiple names for the same location. We've had this before. We do have an alternative name field. But if it's an Oregon feature, an ODFW hatchery, for example, obviously we'll use the name that ODFW wants to use, but hopefully that's been truthed in advance. And I will say, especially for the location of facilities, hopefully those who are submitting data are first looking at how what they're submitting lines up with what we already have in the cases where we have the same facility, just to make sure that you do feel confident that your location is better than what we have. Because we did spend a lot of time doing QA QC on those locations, so we don't want to go backwards and like move dots around too much, right? So I think, you know, question again to the group, I'm open to hearing if there's heartache around how this is proposed to operate, and also open to suggestions. I'll throw out one of the questions that have been in my mind, and that we've seen a number of screw trap related initiatives out there. I think there's one agenda later today, and so you know, it does come to mind, like when do we and don't we include a screw trap, for example, and that's open. We do have a number of them, especially if they have PID tag records tied to them. But I think that's, I guess, wanted to put out there that we're open to evolving this based on what we're hearing feedback from you all. Okay, not seeing any hands. Next slide. Population boundaries. This is another kind of like the trends, another data set that, you know, once established, hopefully doesn't need a whole lot of editing over time. So we haven't made a lot of edits to this one. It's supporting the CAP project, and additions can be incorporated on an as needed basis. The process for doing that guidance is included in the CAP DES in Appendix C, but it does effectively require some interaction with us here at the commission, sending either guidance, directions, a spatial data set to be the spatial corollary to go along with the tabular record for the population ID. Like trends, that table I'm pretty sure can be edited through the API, and population table also is used for adding groupings of populations, but those can be reflected in the query system again readily when edits are made. They don't rely on the GIS is really just being used to provide the geometry for the query systems. Is that hopefully clear? Mike, do you want to chime in at all about how the API is working with relation to like trends and population table?
Not really. Greg would be the better one to talk to that.
Okay. But it is, yeah, it is in the DES for both of those. There is a section referencing how to submit spatial data. And if we need, again, one of the things I would suggest is if there's feedback about how to improve this process, or maybe it might involve adding clarifications or more descriptions to the process in the DES, because it feels like that's the place where people are looking, right? I want to not create too many different places to go look for directions. So I would work with Mike to add more language there if needed.
Yeah, good point. We do want the DES to be like the one place people look for things. So,
yeah,
if we need to direct somebody somewhere else for further direction, then we'd want to do that within the DES, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. Seeing the chat. Okay. Unless there are other questions on population boundaries, next slide. And this is one that we generated in 2023 the first time. And thanks to Evan for helping me think this one through. Came out of the work we did on bull trout areas, fish management working group, or FMWG. So fish current range layers are available. The list of species they're created and published for matches those that are separately published for fish distribution, and they are derived from the fish distribution data set, effectively selecting all of the HUC 12 boundary layers or subwatershed boundary layers that distribution exists for, and then dissolving on the outer, to the outer boundary just to create a simpler feature to work with. Intermediate steps are saved, but the takeaway is this fish outer range layer. This was created based on a request from Bonneville, and I believe it was meant to feed a use case in CP Fish, but there's a lot of value for it, and I think we're going to maybe talk about it some more later in the agenda. But I wanted just to point out it's not something that gets submitted by you guys, but it is directly related to fish distribution and is derived following any. It would be rederived following any significant updates to fish distribution, especially anything that extends the range, right? If it spills over into another watershed or something. So following that pattern of submissions, I'm targeting spring, summer to do an update on fish current range layers. And that, partially is, I think it's, when we did this, it was kind of glaring some of the obvious gaps that existed between the Oregon, California, transition area. And so especially for lamprey and fall chinook, there's a real obvious data gap to fill there and there is data from Cal Fish and Wildlife that we can use to fill that. So that's in the hopper now. Any questions about this? Okay, next slide. So shifting gears now from, what we just walked through is all of what I consider all of the core layers that we currently publish, including some of the history of how they've evolved. And now thinking about how we might discuss how to make future changes to our data standards to address some requests we've heard. And I really want to hear what you all think on this one. One of the things I'm highlighting here as an example, a good one, I believe, is Oregon Fish and Wildlife's fish habitat distribution data standard. Does and has for a long time included historical as a use type. And that has come up a number of times, especially recovery planning or restoration practitioners, others that would love to know what the historic range or historical range is for a species. Find that a shortcoming of our current fish gist layer is it just is what is considered the current distribution. And so one of the things that it's been queued up for years as a discussion topic, and we never really bit it off as something to propose a change for, but I thought this might be a good chance to discuss that again and see if there's a new appetite for this. Especially, Evan, I'll mention, since you brought up the range one assessments and some of the work that is done there, whether or not, I think the challenge in the past has been whether or not the information to support adding that value as a use type was going to be available across the region in a consistent way. So that wouldn't be confusing to folks to have historical as an option, say only in Oregon and not in Washington or Idaho. But maybe that's changed. And so really kind of curious to hear from you guys or others other than ODFW incorporating historical data in distribution layers. I haven't. I don't believe I've seen it in Washington's, but Evan, can you speak to this all?
I'm sorry, we were chatting again.
Yeah.
Hit me again with the question, please.
Check the screen. I'm queuing up this topic of whether or not adding historical as a use type to fish distribution would be something that others feel would add value, and if it could be done consistently enough, or if we don't have enough consistency and coverage across the range for species to do it reliably.
Yeah, certainly. So first things first, I think your first question was why do it? And I was just stepping off of my soapbox to answer your question. So we're all familiar with shifting baseline syndrome. And one of the things that we need to do in order to battle that is to provide context to the generalized fish distribution, which we do have. It's like, great. It looks like, look, Klamath River, salmon and steelhead, they're doing great. Look at all that distribution. There must be like 1,000 kilometers. And then you compare that with the historical distribution of 50,000 kilometers, and it provides context. And that's what we need to do here, is provide context in order to battle shifting baseline syndrome, so that we can help people evaluate where we are now relative to where we started, and maybe, where we eventually want to end up. And yeah, that's a beautiful example, the Klamath, where they removed the dam, and very first year, the salmon and steelhead start recolonizing. Or yes, I think that's the phrase I'm supposed to use, recolonizing their historical habitat. And second part, I know for a fact that we can do it for all of the Yellowstone cutthroat subspecies. So including, Bonneville, Yellowstone, West Slope, Lahontan. In addition to that, we can do it for red band trout. We can do it for bull trout. After that, I haven't been through any range-wide assessments for those others, but maybe, hey, Mari, do you remember if historical distribution, I know historical range is included in status assessments for anadromous species, but I wasn't sure if we ever took a stab at historical distribution for Chinook salmon, steelhead, sockeye.
That would have been generally a very high level, right? So they would have said everything above this was habitat, but not necessarily breaking it out into population, because that's also much more of a challenge to describe populations when you don't have any fish to lump together. Does that make sense? So
Correct.
it's more the like, here's a whole major population group area.
Oh,
But also not all of the TRTs did that. Some of the TRTs just, this is what we have now and this is what we are comfortable saying, versus speculating about what once was and putting limited time and resources into describing that.
okay. So, and just for folks who aren't familiar with, that's TRT is Technical Review Team. Is that correct?
Yeah, a recovery team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of
Yeah,
the
from like long
endangered
ago.
species process for listing. So it would have been part of the biological review team before the listing. The technical recovery team was after the listing, trying to document as much as possible. During the BRT process, when the listing is proposed, they do a more surface level glance, which is probably where the extirpated areas that's probably where they live. They don't have more work put into them when it goes to the TRT.
Okay. Yeah. So,
Thanks for
like I
clarifying
said, for the
acronyms.
range-wide assessments, for sure, status assessments, maybe. And regardless, even providing the historical distribution as just, I mean, what was it under? Yeah. I think we were just proposing that we make a new use type and call it historical and move on from there.
Van, am I wrong in thinking back to your yellow and peach map? Does that not incorporate the extirpated areas identified? Right, because that peach color is.
Yeah. So sorry, what you're looking at there is the orangey colors are anadromous, and the more pinky one is resident fish.
Okay.
That's just the coverage of what we have going into it. So some of that's.
But to answer your question, Mari, yes, the probable natural ranges include historic distributions. That's what makes them, one of the primary things that makes them valuable for QA/QC is when somebody miscodes a taxon for, a subspecies of cutthroat that's outside of its probable natural range and it's not stocked, we know that it was an error, or we suspect that it was an error, and we can have people fix it. Yeah.
So
if that makes sense.
I'm glad you used that term, Evan, because it highlights a distinction that we made when if you go back one slide, Sam, we purposely use this term fish current range layers to distinguish it from probable native range, because we're only using current distribution to derive these layers, not historical. So that's the distinction. I'm glad you brought it up, because we're going to get to it in a future slide, but I wanted just to highlight that. I agree, probable native range would be a good target for us to work towards, but what we have currently produced is what I would call fish current range. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Next slide. So yeah, I'm really curious to, and here again is a follow on to the last slide. This is good. Curious to feel out whether or not we feel as a technical team for StreamNet ready to propose something to move forward on this idea of incorporating historical fish distribution into the current data set, knowing that we would potentially need to caveat which species we're able to do this for, and maybe just bite off the ones we feel confident we can do it for first. And here's an example. This is the codes and conventions are pulled from the DES. So again, we would go back, if this is something that we wanted to propose, we would go back and propose a change to DES to add a code and a definition for historical. Again, even though data are sent as spatial data for fish distribution, we want to use the DES as the go-to place to look at the standards and understand what codes there should be in there. So maybe this is one of those things for us to just be thinking about, but I'm open to, I think we have some time for discussion on this if we're up for it. In that, I lay the questions out here. Would this be easy to do? Are there concerns about the fact that we couldn't probably do this for all species, or is it okay to tackle it one at a time? And this will sort of kind of bleed into the next topic as well, which has to do with the range changes. This might, I'll suggest that this
Van,
might
have a look at the chat.
Text.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you for that comment about text values. Yeah, I have continued to use both in the published data set for the purpose, thinking that there are some folks who have automated things that are using codes, but also just to not have to worry about, yeah, Evan, chime in.
I'm sorry, Van, I didn't mean to interrupt. I saw, was it Michelle's? Yeah, I think it was Michelle's comment. I guess, just to be clear, I'm not talking about having any of these StreamNet partners or asking the states to go out and map historical distribution. The only thing I'm proposing is using the existing historical distribution from the range-wide assessments and or status assessments. If that really takes and people find it useful, and we've been doing it for 30 years in range-wide assessments and status assessments, so I think it is useful, then, if people have the time and the inclination, then by all means, feel free to expand upon it. But I am not talking about any of us or anyone else coming up with a new layer. I'm just talking about adding to our existing generalized fish distribution based upon an existing layer of historical distribution in the range-wide assessments. I just wanted to make that clear. Sorry to belabor it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Evan. And again, I think since we've discussed this a number of times, go ahead, Jake.
Just maybe to add on to that, how old are these range-wide assessments, and has better science come along since then that could potentially, cause conflict with any historical evidence of today?
I'll take that one if you want, Van.
Please.
We just finished our Bonneville Cutthroat range-wide assessment last year. Yeah. And we're moving on to our Yellowstone Cutthroat range-wide assessment, I think either this year or next year. And then we'll move on to West Slope Cutthroat, yada, yada, yada. And the way it works, Jake, is we are supposed to publish a new status assessment every 5 years. And what we've agreed to do is update the data every year, just so that we don't fall too far behind and to sort of alleviate the workload. So with that said, they use all of the most current and sometimes where needed historical presence absence data and or distribution data in order to inform the current distribution, the historic distribution, and the conservation populations. The only alternative, and the major point here being, is that it has all of the best, most current data coming from all of the partners, co-managers, etc. With that said, we do not have confidence intervals. So if somebody has a modeled distribution out there, then essentially I imagine they do it almost exactly the same way. Dan Isaacs with U.S. Forest Service, for instance, I know has done some modeling, but the problem is I don't think anybody has model distribution with confidence intervals for as many subspecies and species and such a scale that we could pull off here. So, and all that we're saying is that based upon the latest, greatest data, they were within this distribution. That's all that they're saying, and that it's probably this use type, this habitat quality, and that this is a conservation population based upon genetic information also. So, does that
Yeah,
answer your
yeah,
question?
thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
groovy.
I interpreted right at the beginning, like using some old 20-year-old range-wide assessment. And so, but no, it was good to hear what you guys are doing. I'm not aware of anything quite like that with ODF&W. I know there's modeling going on, whether there's confidence intervals around that. I don't know, but thank you.
Well, we'll come back to this at the end and see if we want to highlight an action item on this, whether or not like a small working group would make sense to decide if this wants to get pushed forward as a proposal. Okay, just let's keep that in mind. And Sam, next slide, please. So likewise, there is a topic on the agenda later on about this idea of incorporating extirpated areas into a polygon layer that defines species. I would kind of like the term probable native range that Evan threw out recently. And I just wanted to highlight that because current range layer is derived from fish distribution, we could potentially expand upon that using both status recovery planning polygons from NOAA for those species and also historical distribution data to expand on it. And this is a topic later in the agenda, so I just wanted to make that connection and provide an example to look at using spring Chinook. Next slide. So just to kind of get our heads around this a bit, this is the spring Chinook example. On the left, you have the current range and distribution that was used to derive current range. Again, dissolved HUC-12 polygons for all the intersecting distribution lines. And then on the right, we have that plus in darker orange is functionally extirpated, and in the red are extirpated based on NOAA's recovery planning, the population boundaries. There's a layer that attribute for status, and these are all coded for status equals functionally extirpated or extirpated. I want to just kind of, in the next slide, we're going to zoom in to the area in the clear water there. Next slide, just to kind of highlight. So this is the last slide. I just wanted to put it out there as a closer look at what this would look like, carrying this example out, and point out that there are current distribution lines and current range overlapping with areas that are coded as functionally extirpated. And that's just, part of the way the data falls. But those are the kinds of things that would need to be kind of worked through. And I just wanted to share this kind of real world example using the data that we know. And so
this is really a good example, Van, because this area is extirpated from the native range, and it has been restocked with specifically not the local spring Chinook. So this is reintroduction of a non-listed stock to an extirpated area that is still extirpated. And that's not our argument here. So it's a very good example of how complex just saying historical run area versus current.
Yeah, thanks. It definitely was one that I would defer to somebody else on, but that's exactly the kind of thing I get nervous about. It's like, well, I don't want to say too much as the GIS guy, right? So we need more minds on this, and it does make me, like, these kinds of like nuances make me wonder about the use case that's asking for this, which Sam's going to go into next. I don't want to go into too much, but just wanted to point out that in some times it doesn't necessarily require integrating data. We could just put the data together in a web map and let it respond to a interrogation from a click, if that's what the use case is asking for. I'm not sure, but I wanted to put it out there. Something for us to think about as we discuss that idea.
And I will say that we did run in. Go ahead, Jake.
Sorry about that. Go ahead, Mark. You can finish.
I was going to say that we did run into this exact complication with the coordinated assessments data, as we had folks pick the population that was existing there in that area to attach data to, because there is data for the spring run Chinook here in this area because they exist, but they aren't the listed population. So we had to establish a very clear distinction between the population that's extirpated and not associating that population or MPG with the data that exists for current fish. So this was something that we stumbled into probably 10 years ago or more now with coordinated assessments.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Maury. Thanks. I think it would.
How are we this old, Jake?
Well, we struggled with this even with the map displays for coordinated assessments.
Yeah.
And I think this would help tremendously with that. And also now with our hatchery one, we can get a better understanding of reintroductions, like that was mentioned a little bit ago, for the web map on that tool as well. So I just throw it out there. I think it's a great topic to move forward, Van. And Sam, I guess you're going to talk about it a little more and get this on the table for DDT to tackle.
Good. Well, I guess that was the end of my planned, presentation. I look forward to follow up, and maybe there's a need to circle back on what would be the next steps if we wanted to propose adding as a incremental step a historical use type value being added to the DES. I would encourage partners that feel strongly about that to step forward and take the lead on submitting an example or proposing it. We know clearly ODFW has a good example to work from, so I
let me
put that out
jump
there.
in here. Sorry,
Yeah.
let me jump in just real quick here too. I was doing something else, so maybe you guys actually already said this. It's good that you're showing the Clearwater Basin here, Spring Chinook, and talking about which, there's original extirpated populations, and now there's new fish in the same place, reintroduced. The way we did this here was just we made a new set of codes for new populations, basically, that overlap the old ones, and so new data about Chinook salmon that are there now are tied to these new population pop IDs. The pop IDs for the original native populations. We have those, but we don't have data. We don't have current data tied to those. So like Mari was saying, we can have both in the same place, right? We can have the extirpated and reintroduced populations overlapping in geographic space, but not in temporal space.
I have hopes and dreams that maybe there will be temporal overlap at someday too. We can have temporal overlap. So let's build it into the data system.
I'm open to any other questions or comments about the topic of spatial data exchanges in general. We are about, it's about 10:10, so I think we're about on schedule with the agenda. Otherwise, Sam, if we want to move on.
Yeah, we can move on if I don't see any other questions, but I'll mention that this next session or topic on a little more focus on this extirpated areas discussion is really going to be just a continuation of this discussion. And I'll say, I think Mari and Mike know more about this than me, and most of you guys probably know more about this than me. So I'm just going to sort of introduce a new project. Let me move the slides. And yeah, so like I said, this is going to mostly just be discussion of what we've been talking about, but I will introduce this new project that actually Megan Detloff will be the project leader on. And I don't think she's on. I think she has another meeting right now. But this is part of, she is kind of the lead of the fish monitoring work group. That'll be part of that. But the purpose of this new project, and it's very much related to what we've just been discussing, is developing the focal species polygon maps, Huck 12 scale like before. But the big difference here is this is for use by Bonneville Power's CB Fish, and also by monitoring resources, the mapping on those systems. And then any other regional partners that build upon the StreamNet distribution layers, which we just discussed. And so this, these focal species polygon maps, we're calling it draft. We want to make sure everyone knows that this is a draft right now. Includes distribution, which includes the extirpated areas, extinct areas, or anything else that's relevant, but it also includes stream habitat use and stocking groups. So it's a little bit more than just the extirpated areas, but since we're on the topic, it seemed appropriate to bring this focal species polygon maps up. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Van is going to be working on this project pretty closely. But the process for this project is to locate existing layers and information, which we've been doing forever. But then working with the StreamNet partners and PSMFC GIS team, which is Van and Lily, and then drafting these polygon layers and fully documenting the sources. So it's going to include the metadata associated with those. And that's kind of how it links to CB Fish and monitoring resources. We're going to share these draft polygons and the information sources with StreamNet partners. We'll work with the fish monitoring work group. That's really where Meg comes in and where all the bios come in, and you all to really make sure we are getting the right information and to do some expert reviews of these polygons. And then we will package layers and make them available to CB fish and monitoring resources. And I don't know the timeline on this. I assume it is multiple years, maybe at least a year. We have a ways to go on it. But the fish monitoring work group, I believe they are starting up soon with this polygon task group to kind of get the ball rolling. And obviously we have a head start with the GIS team. So similar to kind of what Van discussed, is we have a list of species that we'd like to make these polygons for. We're going to start off with spring and summer Chinook, and then we'll go into fall Chinook, summer Chinook. So it's kind of just, that list is sort of the order of operations. Some of them will be done at the same time, but the gray species will be done before the blue species is the plan. But I'm assuming, we're gonna, much of it will kind of be done in tandem if it's available. So then here's just examples on spring Chinook, and this is kind of, I can go through this or we can kind of just discuss what's going on. But we have that spring Chinook distribution right there. It's on StreamNet, it's available. You have your, rearing and migration, your spawning and rearing, and then you have some unknown distribution. And then we create our Huck 12 polygons based on that information, which we would then generate this draft version of the current fish range layer. This is stuff that Van just showed off. And then we would add the additional existing layers, relevant attributes and information. So what we would be interested in for this extirpated areas section, especially would be that historical range as it's available. But again, this project is going to look at more than just the extirpated areas. So adding additional existing layers and relevant attributes to the spring Chinook here. We can add the ESEs and the MQGs. And then add things such as like the catfish HLI information as well. So we want to have that metadata associated with these. Now, I think we spend most of this time just discussing the possibilities of extirpated areas and how we want to go about that, which we, already started. I just wanted to bring attention to this polygon layer group that will be starting soon, that I'm sure many of you will be involved with. And we're using the information from that we've already collected and Van's already mapped to build upon. And I can go back to any slides you guys have questions on. I can't actually see the chat, Mari, so if you see anything in the chat, chime in.
Yeah, there isn't anything in the chat right now, Sam.
Cool. Any questions on this polygon group? I might not be able to answer them completely, but it is using a lot of the information that we already have and that Van actually already discussed in his presentation to build upon. Yeah, Evan?
Hey, Sammy. The only other thing I would add is we would need to include our barriers layer in order to block out Huck 12 polygons, which were never part of the historical distribution. And then also those speak to, you know, for instance, in that previous example, in the Clearwater River subdrainage, where we had the whole North Fork of the Clearwater extirpated because it was blocked by Dworshak Dam. So just wanted to mention that we would have to also use our barriers layer in order to completely derive this completely incorrectly.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. And again, I think, you know, one of the primary goals of, you know, mapping this out is to identify potential restoration areas, potential recovery areas, things like that. As an example, and this doesn't include the Columbia River Basin, but at the Steelhead meeting last month, there's a population of steelhead in Southern California that were in danger of essentially being washed away, or their stream being completely blocked up due to fires and flooding. And what they did is they moved as many of these trout over into a stream nearby that had been an extirpated area. And so that is just one example of why this kind of information could be useful. And I think this just happened a year or two ago, and so I don't know how those populations are doing in their new, or I don't know if they know exactly how their populations are doing in their new area, but it was a pretty cool use case of why keeping this information available might be of use. Yeah, Ben.
Hey Sam, I'm not sure if you're the one, if you have the answer to this, but there was mention of the ask for this project coming out of a CP fish use case, or maybe a monitoring explorer use case. I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit to just get at my earlier question about whether or not creating a new separate layer was necessary, or whether or not pulling the component parts into a web map would get the objective met.
Yeah, well, I don't know for sure how BPA CB Fish would be using these layers. I know that in monitoring resources, the monitoring explorer map, the idea behind it, or the purpose behind it, is to identify similar products or projects, or to like explore what other people are doing and where and why. And so extirpated areas on that map, and again, I think the idea is that this would be a toggle sort of on or off. You can add it, or you can just look at existing or the current ranges, right? But to see, you know, okay, there are these restoration projects going on and they happen to be in these extirpated areas, or where could we potentially focus our next project if we're looking for restoration? So that's the idea, monitoring explorer map. Are people using it that way? I'm not positive right now, but that'd be kind of the push, at least on the monitoring resources side, to be like, hey, look at these extirpated areas on this map, and you know, maybe you can help identify where your project or a new project might populate. Now, yeah, I don't know how CB Fish would be using this. I don't think Russell's on yet. He's going to join later, but he would probably know best of why we would want to include extirpated areas. And it could just be a funding type of thing, you know, securing funding for certain areas, proving that look, there used to be Chinook here, or this, particular species or population. But I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Okay, thank you.
So now, if anyone has anything else to say about extirpated areas, I think we can just discuss. I know we've, maybe these are the better slides for that, a little more focused on it. And if not, we can jump over to break and come back to this. But sorry, Mari, did you have something to say?
Sorry, no.
All right, well, I guess keep an eye out for the polygon or the focal species polygon layers group, and then we can kind of continue this extirpated areas discussion. It got brought back up via email after our last StreamNet Tech Team meeting, and I think there was some pretty good discussion there that then urged us to discuss it more here. So. Yeah, I think, we can have more discussion about this at another time, or we can kind of just keep it in mind and highlight the questions being asked through notes and stuff like that.